Hello and welcome back to another episode of the ADHD Goals podcast. I have another guest for you today who I'm quite excited to introduce. Her name is Tricia Salt. She is an artist, printmaker and performer based in Cornwall in the UK. And she is also one of my fellow ADHD Works coach trainees. So I'm very excited to talk about that, but also about your life as an artist as well. So there's plenty of stuff to talk about there. So how are you doing, Tricia?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good, yes. My kids are on summer holiday at the moment, so I'm keeping them squirreled away downstairs quiet whilst we record.
Yeah, it's been really quite good weather here the last couple of weeks, and today's turned into a proper dreary one, so everybody needs a little bit more entertainment, I think.
Yes, yeah. Well, the strangest thing happened over the course of last week. So my nephew came to stay with me the week before last, and he's a little bit older than my kids. And so when I was putting them to bed, he put on Rocky 4. And I've got two girls, 11 and 9, and they'd never seen anything like it. I'd quite often told them about, that's like a training montage from Rocky, because loads of TV programs use that as a trick. And so they'd heard about Rocky, and then this is the first time that they saw it. And then since then they've become obsessed with it, and we've watched all the Rockies.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
This is really embarrassing. I'm not sure if I'd even seen Rocky.
Well, me and my brother used to play act Rocky, and where we would watch the movie and then we would pick up the cushions from the sofa, and then he'd basically beat me up because he's 6 years older than me. So, but he'd beat me up to a point where I'd be crying. That's probably less about the fact that I was getting hurt, but more about the fact that I couldn't win, which is probably an ADHD thing, would be too competitive. But then he would pull out the old line of, he'd like find himself lying on the floor and go, yeah, but one more punch and you could be the world champion. So I'd gather myself and then try and hit him, but then he would go back to the same arrangement of beating me. But anyway, that's what I've been up to in the last week.
That sounds like great fun.
Yeah.
I mean, not the getting beaten up by your brother bit, but
no, that was a long time ago. No.
No, my sister and I were more. We were Bill and Ted kids. I think we knew all of Bill and Ted and all of Wayne's World off by heart, and just used to play at that.
I went to a fancy dress party last year, and I got me and my brother. I got us Wayne's World outfit, so I went as Wayne and he went as Garth. So I do now have a Wayne's World cap to wear out and about, which I treat myself to. Exactly. That's.
Oh no, that's the wrong one. Yeah.
So anyway, so tell us about you and your background and your ADHD. When did you find out about your own ADHD?
I found out it was in 2020. I actually I first started looking into ADHD just before the pandemic. I'd been having some therapy, which was brilliant, really helpful. I'd come out of a couple of very difficult relationships, and it was helping me with that. And we were having a conversation about my upbringing, and I think we were talking about stuff that I'd experienced at school. And the therapist said, by the way, have you ever been tested for autism or anything like that? And I was really shocked because I just kind of never even thought about anything regarding neurodivergence to do with myself. And I went away that night and went online and tried to find all of these tests sort of see if there was anything. I mean, she wasn't suggesting any particular diagnosis. She just wanted to know. But I did these tests, and the one for autism didn't come back particularly high, but the one for ADHD was just like, so I went back the next week and said, oh, I think I'm going to talk to my doctor about this. And at the time, there was it wasn't as bad as it is now as far as waiting lists. So I think it was a couple of years. But I moved when the pandemic started back to Cornwall, where I'm from, and I moved from the Devon waiting list to the back of the Cornwall waiting list, and was very lucky to be able to get a diagnosis in the end through Right to Choose.
Yes.
With Psychiatry UK. So yeah, about the end of 2020, I had moved house, and I had no job anymore because of the pandemic, and and fresh diagnosis of ADHD.
Oh, excuse me.
Which I'm sure lots of people kind of have a huge range of emotions and things that they look back on through their life that they suddenly realize make perfect sense. But that process was kind of happening for me during that time. So that was really interesting.
Something made me think when you were talking about that journey from therapy to ADHD diagnosis. I had a similar thing. I was going to see a therapist about procrastinating, and we were talking about my background, and I had psychologized myself and had looked at my own background, and an interesting thing about my parents is before I knew anything about ADHD, I was going, well, that's because they did this, they did that, and so I had a nice little sort of suite of excuses that was like, well, that's just because, well, wait, look at what my parents have done to me, and I reflected on that the other day, thinking, oh, because the reason why I did reflect on it is because a lot of members of my family now are sort of talking about ADHD, like my brother's kids and my sister's, one of my sister's kids, and it's all going back and pointing at my mum, and we're all going, "You've got ADHD," and so she's like, "Everybody's blaming me for this, that, and the other," and I thought about it, and I thought, well, actually, that's not your fault. Nobody's actually blaming you for having ADHD. We understand that. Probably the worst scenario would have been if we'd have just stuck with the therapy and blamed you for everything else. So,
I
so
mean,
yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, therapy is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, it's one of those things where you kind of, it depends on the context, obviously, but with different people, you can kind of, you can pin things back to stuff that happened in your own history. But when you start getting into the fact that will then happen because of what happened in your parents' history, and then what happened in their history, and then what happened in, and just recognizing that patterns do sort of carry on, and how that happens, I find really interesting, but also fairly unfathomable. I think one of the nice things about doing the coaching is that we kind of help people to talk through experiences that they've had, and look forward to it, and look forward to how they'll approach things in future. But with therapy, all of that sort of looking back and processing stuff, I can't imagine doing that on my own to a degree where I could actually be objective enough about it to deal with it without having had that therapy. I thought it was so valuable, and like, yeah, something, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It throws to light for me the difference between what we do and what therapy does, and how valuable both are, and what the differences are between them.
Yeah. So what sort of challenges, like with regards to ADHD, what
Yeah.
sort of challenges were you finding that you were facing?
I imagine the first things, like, once I got an idea that I was ADHD, the things I started to recognize in particular were organization, and things that I'd been and losing things. I lose everything. I particularly lose things when I'm stressed.
Mm.
So it's interesting, the terminology that I would use for these things before I knew about ADHD. I used to tell people that I had a problem with small objects. And he's like, oh, I've lost my keys. Sorry, I've just got a problem with small objects. And that's something that's happened my whole life, that I was in huge trouble for at school. I was in secondary school put on something that they called being put on report, which
Yeah.
now as an adult, I realized was just punishing me for having ADHD by giving me more admin tasks. It was just like, it was just, having to add an extra few steps into trying to get your homework done whilst still living in a world of your own chaos. And so I think those were the first things, like the really obvious things. And also things, once I got onto social media, there wasn't quite as much social media as there is now about ADHD, but certainly one of the things I found myself relating to other people to when I started seeing other people talking about it. And the stuff that came a little bit later perhaps was realizing the elements of emotional dysregulation, and looking at how perhaps my motivation to do certain things has been affected, but also just the kind of the thriving in chaos as well as the being deeply affected by it. And the always having, I have never held on to a job for more than a year. I've never enjoyed living in the same house for more than a year. I've always been happiest when I've been traveling. I've always been happiest when, I don't even know if I am happiest when things are changing all the time. I just can't stand it when they don't. So that's been really interesting to deal with. And those things, that and the emotional dysregulation, I think have been sort of less obvious and easy and quick to pinpoint what it is, and actually much bigger processes to deal with.
I mean, we quite often, well, I mean, in terms of sort of the ADHD coaching side, and when we meet people who want coaching, we meet them at a point where they're at a loose end and they're facing challenges and they're stuck and they need help getting out of those. And I just asked you, my first question was, what were the challenges that you were facing? Whereas, looking at what you've done in the past, as an artist and a creative, we sometimes forget to focus on what are the strengths that you've got. I'm making assumptions, but I mean, the fact that you've pursued a career as an artist and a creative probably means that you spend quite a lot of time living to your strengths. Would that be fair to say?
It is, and I've only considered myself an artist in the last 4 years. So that's actually something that's happened since I got the ADHD diagnosis.
That's
I
interesting.
tried very hard to kind of funnel my creativity into productive, organized careers that were more suited to what other people told me I should be doing before. So I used to do graphic design, and I've done a lot of just admin jobs, things that I was either suited to but not really full time because I couldn't hold it all in my head full time, or things that I wasn't suited to at all, or kind of ways of almost packaging the creative side of me to be more acceptable and more profitable for other people. And so the art side of things that's happened in the last few years, and actually allowing myself to pursue the projects that I've been interested in for myself, has felt, at times it's felt very indulgent. At times it's felt like, I'm not really making money out of this. I'm just pursuing creativity. because it calls to me and because I love learning new stuff.
Yeah.
But it's now getting to the point where people are seeking me out to run an arts workshop or that kind of thing. So it's perhaps not the career part of it has definitely only just begun, really.
Mm.
Um,
I've found what you've just said, like that journey. Uh, I completely resonate with that, and what excites me is the fact that you have been brave enough to take that step to being more true to your creative artistic side. Because like I remember when I chose to go to university, I decided I didn't have any careers advice at school. I decided that, well, I'll go and do business economics at university because that will get me a manager's job, and a manager's job is more grown up. And after 3 weeks of being there, a friend of mine who used to go to the same school as me, he was on the product design thing, and I'd done design. I got my best results in design technology, and I was like, "Why am I not doing this?" And
yeah,
it was just this conception that I'll be more acceptable to the rest of the world if I do this sort of like grown up thing. And I've found that, throughout my career, I've been, I've done graphic design and web design and UX design, and 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 I felt, oh, I'm being creative here, but I would always find myself like, obviously, the longer you're in a job, the more managerial stuff you're expected to do, and then I would sort of then panic and be like, well, I need to be really good at that adulting bit of being organized and process driven and like you say, profitable, and found myself really over obsessing on that side of things rather than doing the creative side of things. And I've just felt that I'm not actually being any creative at all anymore. Um, but so I think it's really refreshing and inspirational to see that you've actually done that.
it is, and feels like I feel very pleased with it because I feel like I possibly have spent quite a lot of time trying to sort of fit into other people's expectations, but I also feel like, there's an amount of privilege to it as well. Like I would not have gone back into education if it hadn't been for the pandemic and if I hadn't been kind of unemployed and been forced to make a decision there, and that was a nice thing to come out of a really horrible time. I suffered quite a lot with my mental health during the first year of the pandemic. But also, I have been incredibly lucky that there is a support network there for me that I have, like, if everything went wrong and I hadn't been able to, uh, m- I have been able to, for example, pay for studying.
Mhm.
And if something had gone wrong and I'd lost my job during that time, there would have been someone there who wouldn't necessarily have looked after me, but I would never have been homeless and I never would have been left without food.
Mm.
And I think for some people, and certainly in previous times in my life, there've been situations where I really, had to try and earn money and make that the biggest focus. So sometimes it's a sense of adulting, and sometimes it's kind of like this necessity that the world puts on you to like to conform, and you have to kind of find your way through that and wait. And I think that's a difficulty that a huge amount of people face, that I have also faced.
Mm.
And there's a part of me, and I don't think all creatives do this, and I don't think they all have to do it, but part of part of the reason for choosing to become an ADHD coach, for example, is that I want to take that financial pressure off the creative stuff that I do. It would be
Mm.
lovely if I could just get paid to make art, and if I could make the art I want to and someone would pay for it. But unfortunately, in the economic climate that we're in the attitude that there is to the arts, and also, um, in my own personal life, there isn't really a guarantee that that's going to help. And so I'm hoping that having something that is more that has more of a clear line between the work and the income will allow me to maybe have a day a week where I just devote myself to my artistic practice and get to be there without having to constantly be trying to fit it, to go back to what I was doing before and fit it into a financial model.
Yeah. So I'm interested to know what sort of things you get up to with your art. But I think I did notice on your LinkedIn that you do workshops. Is that related to
Yeah.
so I mean this is just like the idea part of my head going. So I mean what's the split between you creating art, as a and comparing that with maybe helping others learn how to create art as well? Is there an element of
Yeah.
that?
There is. I love running workshops that are sort of skills based, but that's not the one the one that really gets me is when I am running workshops that just get other people making stuff and accessing that part of their brain.
Mm,
And during the first lockdown, I like I mentioned, I had a really hard time and
mm,
I was having quite a difficult I was finding it difficult. My executive functioning skills got limited so much that I couldn't even like make myself draw or read or anything. Like I couldn't concentrate on anything for very long at all. And so I started doing really quick, simple drawing exercises to music because that was how I found that I could at least, like, if I put on 5 songs and I told myself to draw a picture of, a bus, and just really simple tasks. And the sillier they were, the better. And the more of a remit there was to it, the better. So I would give myself like a very specific prompt, a very specific time limit, and some music and make it as fun as possible. And I would do a little bit of drawing each day, and that kind of kept me feeling happy. And when we came out of the first lockdown, I turned that into a workshop, which I called Drawing Board, with ORED rather than.
yeah, yeah.
And I turned it into like a 3-hour Zoom meet workshop that I just put on free for all my mates or just pay as you feel, and sort of advertised it on Facebook. And then it got really popular and it was really nice. And we would start each one with like 1 minute um drawing exercises, like close your eyes and draw a lobster, which is one that I once won a round in a pub quiz, closing my eyes and drawing a lobster. So I was pretty good on that one. And then
Is that with the one line technique or
yes, the other ones were like that. So
yeah?
yeah, you have like a 5-minute exercise that was that. There were loads of different drawing exercises, and I'd make a playlist for each of the sessions, and it was a really nice way of um having a bit of social as well. Like we chat before and after, but it was what I found was, and what people fed back was, there's permission to to be silly, to fail, to do a bad drawing.
Mm,
Do a drawing where you had to look at the other side of the room and then you had to look back at it and put extra bits in. And I think that's the essence of really getting good at anything creatively, is you have to be bad at it to start with, but you have to allow yourself to be bad at it. And that's my favorite. I'm about to start running those again. That's my
yeah,
favorite work.
yeah. Well, some things have been sort of occurring to me whilst you were talking about that, and it comes from that what you were saying during lockdown. You were struggling to do the things that you enjoyed that would bring you enjoyment, which was drawing, and because you struggling with mental health and your executive functioning, and it was preventing you from doing something that you actually enjoy, and that's sort of how I felt. That was the situation that I was in when I was procrastinating. I was thinking, there's these things that I want to do, but I can't
Yeah.
do them. Um, and I think that's a problem that a lot of people have. If I think back to something else that you said about you want to take the pressure off your the financial need to produce artwork, because then that puts an extra pressure on it, and then that takes away the freedom to create, because there's a lot more pressure on what you create then, rather than feeling the freedom to be silly and see where it goes. And I think that's really important with being creative is to allow, as you say, the freedom to fail, because otherwise you're gonna come at it from a different angle of this got to make money, or and take the fun out of it, and then you're just gonna find yourself dead. All the fun's gone out of it, and you can't actually bring yourself to do it.
Absolutely. And I think it's knowing yourself, because it's not the same for two people, you know? But for me, that's where the balance lies. But I know that in other situations, the pressure, you know, will motivate me to do something,
Mm,
will get me to take that next step. Or for other people, they might find that actually, you know, knowing that a piece of work that they're working on needs to be sold is actually something that drives them to be really good at it.
mm,
And I think just with the artwork that I've been making recently, because I used to sort of just make lino prints that were, you know, sort of landscapes, and they were quite pretty, and try and sell them. And I still do a little bit of that, and I enjoy doing that. But a lot of the work that I've been making more recently has been a little bit more out there, and a little bit less conventional and less kind of commercial. And that's the stuff that I want to protect by not putting the pressure on it.
mm. I wonder, yeah, because you're right. It's different for different people in terms of that pressure element. But I wonder if whether you've had any experience of when the pressure has prevented you from doing it, it's because maybe first of all you've needed to prove yourself that you could do it. So it makes it harder if you like you say, if you're trying to do something new, but then before you've even proven to yourself that you can do it, there's a pressure that it's got to be like an outside pressure that it's got to be good. Then, well, I think I personally would find that quite difficult when I'm trying to explore. But
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And I think, you know, anything requires warm-ups as well. You know, if you're going to sing, you need to really do a vocal warm-up. If you're going to do exercise, then you need to warm up. And it's kind of like that with creativity. If you sit down and go, right, I'm going to paint a masterpiece, then there is a huge amount of pressure. And what I like about the workshop that I mentioned, and that idea of being silly, is that it's not to make the masterpiece, it's the warm up, you know.
mm,
um and you know, you don't have to run the fastest race in your warm up. You can just do some stretches, and it's
yeah,
fun. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's really important about enjoying the process. Um, so tell us a bit more about the journey into becoming an ADHD coach. What drove you to take that step?
So I was at uni. I started off, I did the first year of a speech and language therapy degree, and then at the end of that decided it wasn't for me, and moved into an MA in printmaking.
Mhm,
Just decided, you know, sod it, basically. I just want to do what I want to do for
mm,
a couple of years. Spent all my savings on it. And, and while I was there, I got DSA, which is a disabled students allowance, which allowed me to have a couple of bits of technology, but also a study support. And the study support that I had during my MA was just invaluable. I just like found it so helpful to have someone. I only spoke to her a couple of, like, once every couple of weeks, but it was someone to talk through what was going on with me, talk through my thought process, what it is that I needed to do in the following couple of weeks, and to really put a structure around where my work was going. Postgraduate degrees are quite free form. I'd only had like 3 deadlines over 2
mhm,
years. It wasn't like there was a lot of structure externally. So between me and her, we were kind of putting a structure around how I was managing my workload.
mm,
Um, And then when I left in September last year, I missed that. I didn't have that. I didn't have anybody who got what was going on with me, but I was also like, I was working freelance. There was no support really anywhere.
Hmm.
And so I looked into coaching then and applied for access to work. And the more I looked into coaching, realized actually I think I would be quite good at this,
Hmm.
and that I would like to provide that support for other people. And yeah, gradually as more and more about coaching kind of came apparent, I realized the differences between that and the study support I'd have. But still, that sort of core element of helping somebody to talk through the things that they need to achieve, and their putting structure around some of their thoughts, and being a sounding board for them.
Hmm.
Uh, it resonated with a bit of volunteering work that I'd done before as well. Um, and also was careery enough that I felt like it would satisfy the part of me that felt like I should be doing something a bit more responsible.
Yeah. I'd never heard of the study support before, so I think that's really, really useful for anybody who's listening who is studying to know that there's something out there that they can apply for. Um, I'll have to.
I know people who've had DSA from different universities who've had very different experiences, and also people who've had different experiences um, with, how happy they were with. So you get offered support based on your circumstances, but it's quite generic compared to, say, for example, the coaching, which is very tailored to the individual.
Mhm.
Whereas the actual support staff that you get, I was offered someone who was more of an emotional support person and someone who was offered more of a study support person.
Mhm.
And I just got really lucky with my study support person, that we had that rapport, and that we were able to work in a way that helped me structure things. But I've also spoken to other people too who have had um, more or better results with the person that was their more emotional support
Mm.
person.
Mm.
But I really encourage anybody who's a student with ADHD to apply for DSA. It
Mhm.
made even just knowing support was there made a huge amount of difference. Being able to say to a tutor, "Oh, by the way, in some courses, if you have exams, they'll give you extra time. In some
Mhm.
courses, they will give you extensions on deadlines, things like that." Which it was really bad for me because I should not be given deadlines. But for some people, it's really helpful. So, yeah, I would say go for it, definitely.
Yeah. Um, so, with your ADHD coaching practice, are there any are there I mean, are there any specific groups of people that you want to work with, or is it a more general approach?
I think I started off before we were learning how to do the course. I started off thinking I would specialize in creatives and
Mm.
late diagnosed women.
Yeah.
And the longer I've been exposed to it, and judging by the experiences I've had with the 3 clients I've had already, I actually feel like I want to broaden it. I feel
Mm.
like, because everybody's experiences are so individual,
Mm.
even within a sort of narrow group of people,
Mhm.
I don't feel like and perhaps, if I was to deal with people who worked in the art world, or people who worked in graphic design or something that I've worked in, I could perhaps have a slightly better insight into how the world that they're operating in works. But really, it's so much more to do with their individual brains and how they operate and how they process what's going on, and being able to join them in that.
Mhm.
I've if anything got a little bit less specialized.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, before we started recording, you mentioned that you were preparing a website. Um, do you have a where would people find you? Are you available to be found yet?
Yeah, the website's going to be up very soon. It is triciasalt.com. Tricia is Tricia. And I'm also, I was going to do an Instagram, but I haven't launched that yet. So that if that does come into existence, that will be. I've been basically hoarding memes in the stories, but I haven't actually put any posts out yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of memes, but nothing else just yet. If that happens, I'll add that to my website.
Yeah, I find it's challenging keeping up with social media. Like, it's challenging not to get sucked into rabbit holes when you're on it, but then also trying to come up with ideas and publish stuff in a way that doesn't mean that that's the only thing that you're doing rather than
Sure.
any of the work. I don't know, right? Is this intentional? But your studio is called the Good Egg Studio.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you come up with that name?
Yeah.
Yeah. And your surname is Salt,
Yeah.
which is like, you could say, like salt of the earth,
Yeah.
which is like the good egg. A good egg is someone who's salt of the earth, aren't they?
I suppose I didn't. So I chose my surname. I changed my name earlier this year.
Yeah.
Um, and that was not an intentional association, but now you mention it.
Yeah.
The good egg is just because I was in there setting it up and I was with someone who was really helping me, and I was like, "Oh, you're a good egg." And
Mm,
I can't remember what they said. They were like, "Oh, yeah, this is a good egg," and I was like, "All right then."
yeah.
So, but yeah, I guess I feel like there needs to be a bit more. The good egg was more that it's a place for gestating.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
gestating good things that could come out of it, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I do. I think um it gives, like, from hearing a good name of something, it gives me a positive vibe, and I think the good egg sounds really good. I like it. I think if I was going to do a workshop in your studio, I would be excited, and I think I'd come away with positive vibes. I'm very, what's the word? I get very excited by studio spaces. I've Me and my girlfriend often talk about if we moved out of London and we bought a place with more space. I get really excited about the fact that if we had a bigger garden or space where we could put those, those pod type offices that you can get now. I think I'd have a music one. I'd have an art space one. I'd have a workshop one.
Yeah.
I just get really excited about creative spaces. What does yours look like? What?
Mine's a mess. It's a
Yeah.
glorious mess. It's a space. I'm very protective over it actually, because it's my one place in the world. I move house quite a lot. I move like job quite a lot, but it's one place in the world that is my base where I choose what happens, and I don't if I run workshops, I never run them in there because it's my safe place.
Yeah.
It allowed to be messy. And I think having been told off my whole life for being messy and having huge anxiety about my messiness, it's the
Mhm.
one place where I'm like, no, this is deliberately messy because this is how we make art. And then very before I start a new project, I will clean it all up and I'll get all of that kind of good adrenaline from running around putting things away, and then I will turn it into a mess again in the
Mm.
process of creating some art. And it's yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful place. It is
Mm.
definitely my happy space, but I'm not allowed to. There's very bad signal there, so I
Right. Yeah.
can't get around doom scrolling. Um,
That's good.
yeah.
So what does the process or the cycle of being an artist and creating what you create? Do you have shows or exhibitions that you do on a regular basis?
I have done that. So I've stopped pretty much for the duration of this coaching course.
Hmm.
I haven't been particularly prolific in the last 3 or 4 months. But yeah, whenever I get some time, I will go up there, and I'm usually just got a little ideas factory running in the background in my head anyway. So I've always got something to work on, and usually it's
Mm.
just facing the decision paralysis of which of the many things I want to work on. I had a solo exhibition last year, and I've joined a couple of group shows this year. All of them local so far. And then there is a side to being an artist that requires quite a lot of admin,
Yeah.
applying for residencies, applying for exhibitions, and trying to sort of put yourself in the art world, or sort of position yourself within what there is already in existence.
Well,
Um,
that was kind of where I was thinking, what I was thinking about. How do you separate those two very different sort of um, mind spaces? There's the creative part, which sounds like is very intuitive and at your happy place. But then, in order for that all to make sense, you've got to put yourself out there and exhibit. And how do you find that a struggle, or is it a welcome sort of change, or how do you get through that bit of putting an exhibition together or organizing it?
yeah, I think I get quite a kick out of putting together, say, a show or an exhibition, or I put on a theatre show a few years ago as well. And there's enough of a dopamine hit for me to just plow on through that. And the danger then is to just hit overwhelm and to totally do myself in with it, which I have done in the past.
Mhm. Mm.
Um, what I've found really lovely about doing it recently is collaboration,
Yeah.
getting someone who's a supportive curator, or a supportive producer, or somebody even that you have that kind of good rapport with, um, where it's not just the physical load, but also the mental load, the
Mm.
emotional load. Everything else can be split across, and you don't feel like you're doing it on your own.
Mm.
Uh, and the value of that is so much more than I ever realized before, I suppose.
Mm.
So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm amazing at it. I certainly struggle with it, and um, as far as separating that, as far as kind of separating the fun artistic side from the admin side, I physically separate that. Like,
Mhm.
the studio is not for
Yeah.
admin and emailing people and writing my CV and all of that kind of stuff. It's a physical space that I have set aside. And I live in a really, like, cheap little bed city flat, so that I can afford to have that as the space that it
Yeah.
is. So
Yeah.
it's like, but for me, it's important in my practice that that's physically separate to where I do my admin work and my living.
Yeah. I think that's a good transitional tip. If you can physically be in a different space, then mentally you can be as well. I just wanted to pick up on the fact that you casually mentioned that you did a theatre thing. What was that all about?
Um, it's hard to know where to begin with that. I spent a lot of my 30s renovating and sailing a concrete sailboat. And I
Lots of
came,
questions about that. Yeah.
yeah. and when I returned to the UK, I had I'd been thinking about this sort of musical that I think I'd written I don't think I'd written it before I left, but
Okay.
I it,
You'd written a musical. Okay, carry on.
yeah, yeah. It was only short. It was only like half an
Yeah.
hour. And I was really hard tell you about this without telling you like the whole story of everything I did in the last decade. But yeah, when I came back to the UK, I decided to put it on basically.
Yeah.
And so a friend and I, it started out when I first wrote it, it was going to be a one-woman show with a puppet. That proved to be really difficult. And so it became a two-woman show. And I put on an evening where that was kind of the headline, and then we had two support acts, and all of them were in black and white. So we all had black and white makeup, and I designed a black and white set, and it was an adaptation of a really bad 60s horror movie. And got a couple of other performers to do the other acts. So one of them was a poet, and the other one did sort of comedy songs. Yeah, and I sort of produced that, and that was great. It was amazing, and it was really well received, but it was also the time in my life when I have most experienced burnout. Like I found it very difficult to ask other people to do stuff because none of us were getting paid.
Yeah.
So I just took on way too much and completely burnt myself out. Sorry, I feel like I've just rambled.
No, I know. I find it fascinating because, like, in the last few minutes, you've just sort of illustrated, what I feel like a lot of ADHD people's lives are. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that. I've got no filter of can I do this? No. I think I can. I probably will. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's quite. I mean, even as well, the sailing around in a concrete sailboat. it's 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 just like, yeah, why not?
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And it has its pros and its cons because I've done loads of stuff and I've really enjoyed some of it, and some of it's been brilliant, and some of it's probably not been the best idea, and you kind of it's just a different way of living, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think we will have to draw a line there on today's episode. But it's been a fascinating chat, and yeah, I mean, I if I can put links in the show notes to your website, triciasalt.com. But also if I can put a link to your the Good Egg Studio .com as well, that would be very good. But yes, I'm sure lots of people would like to know more about the concrete sailboat trip.
That was quite a while ago now.
Yeah,
I came back. Yeah, I came back in 2018. So,
yeah.
uh,
Well, maybe you'll have to come back on the show at some point in the future and tell us what you were doing sailing around in a concrete sailboat.
yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I mean, that's pretty much captured the whole thing. It was mostly just sailing around in a concrete sailboat.
Yeah. I'm just still fascinated about how that's possible, but yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I want to wish you all the best with the coaching, and
Thank you, and thank you for having me on.
no problem. It was a pleasure. All right. Okay. See you next time. Bye-bye. Well, there we have it. Thank you so much for listening this far. If you want to hear more episodes, then please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you use. It really helps to spread the word. So if you know anyone this episode could help, then please share it with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at ADHD_goals, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can email me at hello@adhdgoals.co. And finally, if you're struggling to manage your ADHD and you would like me to be your coach, then please head over to my website and get in touch. Until next time, bye for now.